Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, everybody agrees with my right honourable friend in the thoughts that she shares, especially in relation to all those who perished in the terror attack in Barcelona, especially Julian Cadman. Mr. Speaker, as part of the process of leaving the European Union, it is imperative that we transfer existing EU laws, regulations, directives and the rest into substantive British law. But there are many concerns, very serious concerns, along these benches about the means, not the ends, of the EU withdrawal bill. So could my right honourable friend assure me that she will look in particular at those amendments that seek to change the EU withdrawal bill so that it doesn't become an unprecedented and unnecessary government power grab?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for raising this issue, and I know that, like me, she wants to see an orderly exit from the European Union and will be supporting this bill, which enables us not just to leave the EU, but to do so in an orderly manner with a functioning statute book. Now, as we do that, of course, we will require certain powers to make corrections to the statute book after the bill becomes law, because the negotiations are ongoing, and we'll do that via secondary legislation, which will receive parliamentary scrutiny, an approach that has been endorsed by the House of Lords Constitution Committee. But I would like to reassure my right honourable friend that as the bill goes through its scrutiny in this House and the debate continues, we will of course listen very carefully to that debate, and I will be very happy to meet my right honourable friend to discuss this further.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Prime Minister on what she just said about Barcelona. The attack was abominable and appalling, and I think we should think of the victims, but also thank the people of Barcelona for their wonderful community response to what was a threat to all of them. Mr. Speaker, I hope the whole House will join me in thinking also of the victims of the terrible floods in Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sierra Leone and Texas, and obviously our thoughts are with those facing Hurricane Irma in the Caribbean as we speak. Mr. Speaker, every member across this House should be concerned that inflation is once again running ahead of people's pay. This week, workers at McDonald's restaurants took strike action for the first time in this country. The boss of McDonald's, Steve Easterbrook, is reported to have earned £11.8 million last year, while some of his staff are paid as little as £4.75 per hour. Does the Prime Minister back the McDonald's workers' case for an end to zero-hours contracts and decent pay?
Prime Minister.
Obviously, the issue that has taken place in McDonald's is a matter for McDonald's to deal with, but the questions... Let's focus on what the right honourable gentleman has raised, which is, let's focus on what the right honourable gentleman has raised about things like zero-hours contracts. In fact, the number of people on zero-hours contracts is very small. There are people who genuinely say as a proportion of the workforce, who genuinely say that it is a benefit to them to be on those contracts. But for 13 years, the Labour Party was in government and did nothing about zero-hours contracts. It is this Conservative government that has put the workers first and banned exclusive zero-hours contracts.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about McDonald's, and the Chief Executive is paid 1,300 times as much as his staff. There are 800,000 people, approximately, in Britain on zero-hours contracts. When she became leader, the Prime Minister pledged, and I quote, "I want to make shareholder votes on corporate pay not just advisory but binding." And she put it into her manifesto. That manifesto has now been dumped or archived, or whatever way you want to describe it. And like so much else in her manifesto, where was the tough talk on corporate greed? Was it just for the election campaign, or is it going to be put, or is it going to be put into law?
Prime Minister.
Well, I suggest to the right honourable gentleman that he looks again at the action that in government Conservatives have taken on this issue. It is the Conservative government that has recently published our proposals on corporate governance. It's Conservatives that gave shareholders the power to veto pay policies. It's Conservatives that forced companies to disclose board directors' pay. And it's Conservatives that introduced tough transparency measures for the banks. That's been done not by a Labour government. It's the Conservative Party that's been putting workers first.
I note she uses the word advisory because page 18 of the dumped manifesto says Mr. Speaker, the next Conservative government will legislate to make executive pay packages subject to strict annual votes by shareholders. She's gone back on her word. To help people struggling, Mr. Speaker, to help people struggling to make ends meet, many politicians have become convinced that we need to cap energy prices. Even the Prime Minister was briefly converted to this policy. Last week, the profit margins of the big 6 energy companies hit their highest ever level. I wonder if I could now prevail on the Prime Minister to stick to her own manifesto pledges on this matter as well.
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, on the question of what we were doing on corporate governance, actually I didn't use the word advisory in my answer, so can I suggest to the right honourable gentleman that in future he listens to the answer and doesn't just read out the statement that he's been But he has raised an important issue. He's raised an important issue about energy prices because we are concerned about the way that that particular market is operating. We do expect the companies to treat customers fairly, and that's why we have been looking at the action that can be taken, and it's why the Business Secretary has been doing exactly that, and he wrote to Ofgem in June asking them to advise on what action they could take to safeguard customers. We're particularly concerned about those who are the poorest customers, who are kept on these tariffs that do not give them value for money. So I agree, and it's the government that is doing something about it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if only that were the case, because Ofgem's plans only will benefit 2.6 million customers. 17 million customers are shortchanged by the big 6 energy companies. She could and should take action on it. Mr. Speaker, but she's not the only one going back on her word. When the members opposite have, Mr. Speaker, when the members opposite have calmed down a little, I'd just like to say this: at last year's Sports Direct annual meeting, Mike Ashley personally pledged to ban the use of 0 hours contracts in his company. A year on, they're still exploiting insecure workers with 0 hours contracts. Will the Prime Minister join me in now demanding that Mr Ashley honour his words and end 0 hours contracts in all of his companies?
Prime Minister.
I've said it's this government that has actually taken action in relation to 0 hour contracts, unlike the Labour Party. But the right honourable gentleman talks about manifestos and people going back on their word. I might remind him that in the Labour Party manifesto there was a commitment to support Trident, our independent nuclear deterrent. Shortly after the election, in private, he told people he didn't agree with that. For years, the right honourable gentleman sat on the Labour Party benches and didn't support Labour policy. Now he's Labour leader and he still doesn't support Labour policy.
Mr. Speaker, I listened really carefully to what the Prime Minister said on this occasion, and I'm struggling to see the connection between what she just said, Mike Ashley, Sports Direct and McDonald's. So maybe she could now answer the question, will she condemn what Sports Direct and McDonald's are doing to their staff? It's quite straightforward, yes or no. Mr. Speaker, today thousands of nursing and other healthcare staff are outside Parliament. They're demanding that this government scrap the 1% pay cap. Poor pay means experienced staff are leaving and fewer people are training to become nurses. There's already a shortage of 40,000 nurses across the UK. Will the Prime Minister please see sense and end the public sector pay cap and ensure our NHS staff are properly paid?
Minister!
We absolutely value the work of all those who work in the public sector, nurses, teachers and others, who are doing a good job for us day in and day out in often what are very difficult and harrowing circumstances. It might be helpful if I remind the House as to where we are on the issue of the pay review bodies and public sector pay, because there are 2 pay review body reports for 2017-18 still to be published and for the government to respond to for police and prison officers, and that will happen shortly. And then later, as always happens every year, later in the autumn we will publish the framework for 2018-19, and we'll continue to balance the need to protect jobs, the need to protect public sector workers, and the need to ensure that we're also protecting and being fair to those who are paying for it, including public sector workers. But I say to the right honourable gentleman that what we have seen from what he does in this House and outside this House is consistently stand up and ask for more money to be spent on this, that and the other. Now, he can do that in opposition. He asks consistently for more money to be spent. He can do that in opposition because he knows he doesn't have to pay for it. The problem with Labour is that they do it in government as well. And when Labour, as a result of the decisions the Labour Party took in government, as a result of the decisions the Labour Party took in government, we now have to pay more on debt interest than on NHS pay. That's the result of Labour.
Speaker, the Prime Minister had no problems finding £1 billion to please the DUP. No problems whatsoever. And NHS staff are 14% worse off than they were 7 years ago. Is she really happy that NHS staff use food banks? Warm words don't pay food bills. Pay rises will help to do that. She must end the public sector pay cap. The reality, Mr. Speaker, for working people is lower wages and less job security, with in-work poverty now at record levels. So will the Prime Minister clarify something she evaded during the election campaign? For those struggling to get by, whether employed, self-employed, permanent or temporary, can the Prime Minister categorically state today they will not see rises in the basic rate of income tax, national insurance contributions or value-added tax?
Prime Minister.
I can tell the right honourable gentleman the help we have been giving to those who are just about managing. We've taken 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether. We've given a tax cut to over 30 million people. We see record numbers of people in employment in this country. We have given the lowest earners the highest pay rise for 20 years by introducing the national living wage. But you only get that with a strong economy. We believe in sound money. He believes in higher debt. We believe in making our economy strong so we can invest in our public services. Labour's approach is reckless, ours is balanced. Our approach delivers a strong economy. That's more money for the public services, more jobs for people and families. But you only get a strong economy and a better future with the Conservatives.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that immigration is essential to the strength of the UK economy, as well as enhancing our diversity and cultural fabric?
Prime Minister.
As I have said on many occasions before, overall immigration has been good for the UK. But what people want to see is control of that immigration. That's, I think, what people wanted to see as a result of coming out of the European Union. We're already able to exercise controls in relation to those who come to this country from outside the countries within the European Union. And we continue to believe as a government that it's important to have net migration at sustainable levels. We believe that to be the tens of thousands, because of the impact particularly it has on people at the lower end of the income scale in depressing their wages.
Sir Ian Blackford.
Mr Speaker, last October, the Prime Minister was forced into a humiliating U-turn on proposals to force companies to disclose how many foreign workers they employ. During the summer, 100 EU nationals resident in the United Kingdom received deportation notices in error, causing alarm to them and many others. We need to cherish those who are here and not chase them away. The Prime Minister must stop dancing to the tune of her right-wing backbenchers and apologise for the disgraceful treatment her government has shown migrants in the UK. In the first instance, will she pledge that international students will no longer be included in the net migration figures?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that in relation to the error that was made by the Home Office, every single one of those individuals was telephoned with an apology. It shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the government did telephone with an apology. But let me just say this to the honourable gentleman. As I explained in my first answer to him, there is a reason for wanting to ensure that we can control migration. It is because of the impact that migration can have, that net migration can have, on people, on access to services, on infrastructure, but crucially, it often hits those at the lower end of the income scale hardest. And I suggest that the honourable gentleman thinks about that impact rather than just standing up here and saying what he has done. It's important that we bring in controls. We want to continue to welcome the brightest and the best here to the United Kingdom, and we will continue to do so.
Heidi Alexander.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of the death of my constituent Kim Briggs, who was knocked over last year by a cyclist on an illegal fixed-wheel bike with no front brake. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the law on dangerous driving should be extended to include offences by cyclists? And does she also agree with me that the 1861 offence of wanton and furious driving, which the prosecution had to rely upon in this case, is hopelessly outdated and wholly inadequate?
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all extend our sympathies to the family and friends of the Honourable Lady's constituent who died in those tragic circumstances. And she's raised an important issue. It was, of course, I think we should welcome the fact that the prosecution were able to find legislation under which they were able to take a prosecution, but the point she makes is a general one about ensuring that our legislation keeps up to date with developments that take place, and I'm sure this is an issue that the Secretary of State for Transport will look at.
Ruth Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. This summer, a third of all parents across the country went without a meal to ensure that they could feed their children during the school holidays. In Stoke-on-Trent, amazing volunteers came together to provide over 10,000 meals for local kids. I'm very proud of my constituents, but I'm disgusted at this government who have done nothing and turned a blind eye. How many kids have to go hungry? How many parents have to go without food before this Prime Minister will do her job and act?
Prime Minister.
Well, I have to say to the Honourable Lady, I recognise, the issue that she has raised about children, particularly those who are normally able to access free school meals during term time, and the impact this has during the holidays, is a matter that her Right Honourable friend, the member for Birkenhead, has, of course, been taking up, and together with colleagues in the APPG for Hunger. Now, from the government's point of view, our focus remains on tackling the root causes of poverty. This is what is important, not just the symptoms. Nearly three-quarters of children from workless families moved out of poverty when their parents entered into full-time work. And we see record levels of employment under this government. That's why this is so important, ensuring that we get a strong economy and those jobs. But I'm sure that ministers at the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Education will be looking at the proposals the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead has brought further.
Mr. John.